Welcome to the Invested Teacher Podcast with Kyle Pierce, Matt Bigley, and John Orr.
Get ready to be taught as we share our successes and failures encountered during our real-life lessons, learning how to build generational wealth from the ground up.
Welcome, invested students, to another episode of the Invested Teacher Podcast.
Well, invested teacher friends and all those invested students out there. Today, we've got an interesting episode because actually, we weren't actually going to record an episode right now. We were actually going to meet to discuss something that is on our minds, and it actually is a current deal that we have under contract. And we had an opportunity to go and do an inspection of the property with a property inspector yesterday. And, we chatted throughout, we discussed a little bit on the phone, but then we sort of all said, hey, let's sleep on it and let's connect tomorrow and address some of maybe the surprises that we found and really just play with our numbers. I like it. And sort of check our emotions a little bit and really try to figure out, where are we at? So we just hit the record button here, and I'm wondering, let's go to Matt here. Matt, tell me or tell the audience, what are we dealing with here with this particular deal?
I like that we're going to Matt right away because it's like we're going to go to Matt right away because it's like usually these, our deals come into play because Matt, sees one or we toss one to Matt and Matt kind of goes like, hey, let me get a little bit of details on a property. So this would be great to get Matt's perspective, like where this one came from to begin with.
For sure.
Yeah, thanks, guys. Thanks. And, our process of vetting these properties and even finding any that are, worthy of doing additional due diligence on is a pretty fluid one. We've got some auto searches set up, so it will just send properties that pop up right into our inbox. You guys will, flip properties to me. I'll do a little bit of investigating into them. We'll decide quickly whether or not they're worth pursuing. And I think that's kind of one of the lessons here. It's with investment properties, especially, you can't get stuck. It's really a volume game. So you've got to look at a lot of different properties. Some right away. Yep. We've talked about our checklist for looking for properties before. Personally, for our investing group, we like bigger properties. Duplexes are fine, but duplexes aren't really where the returns are. And we like to lower that price per door. So rather than paying $250,000 a door for a duplex or more, we like to get that per door number under that 200. So this was an 8-plex. And this one had first come on the market at $1.2 million. And I think what drew us to it was, first of all, the location. It's in a location we have bought previous properties in. Yep. It's a bedroom community of a major city. We've talked about this, our own philosophy of investing is we like to find smaller towns, smaller communities, and find properties there. We believe it's created a little higher tenant profile. A fewer less of the big city problems that, can happen at any property. But we're comfortable with this location because we've bought here before. We liked the number of units. Now, it was a mix, 6 residential units and 2 commercial. Our experience says we don't love commercial, especially empty commercial. One of the largest unit was empty here. We really like residential, but we see the opportunity and the opportunity maybe convert here. What drew us back to this property was that the price had dropped from $1.2 million to $1.05 million. So it was starting to get in our range. And what's awesome with having 2 number crunchers for partners is, I get the financials, flip them to you guys, and in a matter of minutes, you've come up with a great financial analysis to look at, not only cash flow. And we talked about this on a previous episode. We've actually started to adjust our expectations of investment properties away from just looking at cash flow. So that's kind of the premise of the property, some of the things that drew us in fundamentally to it. Notable is that we ended up with an accepted offer on this property without having actually visited it. And that's going to probably be a surprise to many people.
Yeah, and that's something that we're analyzing properties on a regular basis. Like you said, Matt, it's a volume game in a sense that we need to get our reps in. We need to continue to analyze so that we can see what's working for us on the numbers side of things. and make sure that it can work. And we've said this before, that good deals aren't just found. It's not like it just landed in our lap and it worked automatically. We tried to adjust and think about different scenarios, be creative. We've talked about that on the podcast before. So we say, good deals aren't found, they're made. And I believe, guys, when this one first came in, we put an offer in, and it fell flat, right? It fell flat, like it wasn't returned. And when we were looking at this one, we had some ideas in mind to run the numbers. We knew right away after running the numbers on the current rents, especially with that large, very large commercial in the bottom of this, in the ground floor of this building not being occupied, that the numbers weren't cash flowing. And so usually, in past years, we've been looking at, cash flowing. Hey, are the cash flowing? Yeah. All right. Is it cash flowing enough? All right, let's now investigate a little bit further. And in the last, if you've been listening to this, in the last 6 months, you've heard us talk about adjusting that strategy along the way to kind of think long term, think about what's going to be working for you. There are different ways to win in, for investing in real estate, and especially multifamily. So I think when we looked at this one, we played with some numbers, right, Kyle? Like, we got real creative here to make the numbers work before, like what Matt said, before we even attempted to set foot in this thing. Before we even put an offer in, we were trying to see how creative could we get with looking at a different lender. There are some unique lender opportunities. I'm going to let Kyle, fill you in on that, as he did a lot of the investigating on what lender kind of helped us wrap our minds around some of our potential options, because we always want to plan, what's option A, what's option B, like what happens if this happens, and what happens if this happens. We go through those scenarios, like Matt said, before we even attempt to put an offer in, and before we even set foot in this thing.
Yeah, for sure. And I think, this is really interesting, because I think when we first began, kind of goes back to what Matt was saying, might surprise some people that we actually put an offer in and hadn't actually gone inside the building. We knew of the building. We drove by the building. We know the area as was stated. But realistically, it's like, if those numbers don't work, there's no purpose in getting into that building, right? So that meant having actually needing to negotiate on that building, even without going through and doing that inspection. So based on what we know about the building, based on what we see the building being in the future, and I think that's the key piece here, where, even though right away we were dealing with a bit of a cash flow issue up front, we had a vision for what this building could be, or this particular unit that had been empty for some time. And it wouldn't take us too much in order to at least get ourselves to cash flow positive. And, the one thing that I think really put us in a position where we felt like we could get something going was, first of all, we knew that if we could get the price to a specific level, that we would be at a really favorable cost per unit compared to the market. So there was that working for us. And then secondly, we had bumped into a lender that we had never used previously that was going to have some favorable terms, in particular, having some interest-only opportunities and little to no money down up front for the first 3 to 5 years. So for us, there was a lot of positive things going on with this particular building, with this particular, and the location, I should also mention, was not just located in a smaller town, which we enjoy. We like that. There's a little less competition out there. As Matt said, the tenant profile tends to be a little bit different based on our experience. And it was really on a main street. So there was a lot of things going there. We really like that. So we got our deal going, and with those numbers, based on what we knew, we were in a pretty good spot. However, when we got to the building yesterday for the inspection, we had some maybe surprises that we weren't necessarily anticipating. So I'm wondering, Matt, you arrived first on the scene. And by the time I got there, I was running a few minutes behind. By the time I got there, we had already sort of bumped into our first sort of, mystery that wasn't sort of shared in the details of the listing. Tell us a little bit more about that experience, and sort of how does that shift our perspective around this particular property.
And as you said, it was so key for us to negotiate, and the negotiations unfolded over a couple of days, to negotiate a deal before we went to see the property. And it's integral to go and see a property. We're big believers in buying where we live as opposed to buying elsewhere, because even though if all goes well, we will rarely, if ever, attend to this property personally, it's a peace of mind thing to be able to drive by, check it out, whatever that might be. So when we arrived at the property, there was a maintenance worker just leaving the property with a mop. And our inspector had beat us there. He was doing his drone of the roof and that sort of stuff. And he said, "Oh, that guy just left and said he was sent here to clean up the water from the leaking roof." And so, first of all, I love the candor of both running into people like that and then of actually talking to the tenants when you're going
Mm-hmm.
through the units. And listen, tenants rarely, if ever, speak favorably of their landlord.
Yeah.
But through conversations with them, you're also able to learn, a fair amount about the building, verify rents, all those sorts of things. So um, not only was the roof leaking, there was a moment where it actually leaked on me, and we were trying to figure out if it was rainwater or
Oh,
toilet water.
yeah, yeah. You did not enjoy thinking of whether it was toilet water or rainwater.
Now, Matt,
But
before you go on though, like, tell me, like, so the fact that the roof is leaking isn't necessarily something that scares us. But when you have a negotiated deal under the assumption that the
How you doing?
roof is not leaking, that is where we run into some problems, right?
That's right. That's right. And our numbers, our analysis was based on this being a relatively turnkey property, maintained at relatively, expected levels. And so that our capital was going to go into converting this large commercial unit into some other residential units instead of investing in things like roofs, like electrical that are integral to a property fundamentally, but do not bring any ROI. So it got dripped on toilet water or rainwater. We later discovered that it was thankfully rainwater, although I took like 3 showers when I got home. And the other thing that we quickly discovered from the conversation with the maintenance worker and our inspector is that there had been what was purported to be a sewage backup in one of the furnace rooms. And again, to his, I got to get to know this maintenance worker because he was actually pretty funny, whether intentional or not. He said, "I ain't ruining my mop
Yeah, he wasn't gonna.
by cleaning that room." And I loved it. I loved
That
it.
was awesome.
So
Yeah.
Yeah.
that was great. That was great. And this is the reason why, listen, as realtors, we've seen lots of properties and have a ton of experience. But this is why we bring out professional inspectors. And so we brought out a great one. And so he said the reason why I knew it was sewage is because I can see the little bits of toilet paper all over
Oh,
the floor.
so brutal.
Yeah. That was gross. That was gross.
Graphic, but needless to say, we did not walk into that room
Yeah.
with the reported sewage leak.
Yeah.
So any great inspector is going to kind of lead the way throughout the
Mm-hmm.
property, analyzing everything from HVAC to electrical to plumbing to roof condition to exterior, and so he was really our guide through each of the units. And as we progressed through each of the units, we met I think just about all the tenants were home,
I think everyone.
and
Yeah.
every single one of them was home. Yeah, so we had the chance to. Um, have a chat with them to verify rents, to ask them about their experience of living there. And, it was, there were some candid conversations. As I said, tenants tend to be incredibly upfront and honest and, tell you all of their issues and complaints. And you sort of take that with a grain of salt and move on. I think that the challenge for us was as we continued on our tour of the building,
Mm-hmm.
we continued to find additional issues. So the roof, once we were actually able to get on the roof itself, we are able to see it was in terrible condition. And we've just gone through a major flat roof replacement on another property we have after spending years of trying band-aid fixes. And it was incredibly costly. And again, a roof is integral to the building, but it does not bring you any additional return on your investment, nor does it bring you any higher rents. So that was a challenge for us.
Mm-hmm.
We
And
also
fixing it
found
honestly didn't bring me any additional joy, Matt. I
Yeah.
mean,
Yeah.
I do think I want to just throw that in there.
Right.
although we're getting fewer phone calls, which maybe is is a tertiary joy factor.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, we also found in a number of the units old fuse box electrical.
Right.
And of course, if you've hired an electrician lately, incredibly skilled but incredibly expensive. So that was
Mm-hmm.
another challenge for us, based again on the price that we had negotiated, with the
Mm-hmm.
seller.
Mm-hmm.
As we continued on our tour throughout the units, we had the roof now, we had the sewage leak, we had the electrical issues. We found just a general state of disrepair. Um,
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to probably
Well,
estimate at least 40% of the windows were
yeah, I was gonna
broken.
say most of those windows had cracks, and tenants had to tape them up, and they're trying to make sure that like they want to keep the heat in the winter and the
Mm-hmm.
cool area in the summer. There was a lot of disrepair over the course of seeing this unit, and more so than I think what we anticipated on the price point that we had agreed upon.
Yeah, absolutely. And some of that is to be expected. But when there is a active property manager company involved, you don't. I didn't. We were surprised by the volume of it, and
Mm-hmm.
I think the lack of and the seller had only owned the property since 2021. So clearly, some of these issues were pre-existing. But a lot of times when a new owner comes in, they want to improve units because they want to up rents. None of the units, from my view anyways, had actually been updated or upgraded in any kind of
No.
substantial way. So old cabinets, old washrooms, and presumably behind those walls, old electrical, old plumbing,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
they had radiators, and they in some cases installed wall furnaces. So our initial excitement over locking up what we thought were going to be 8 great units was definitely tanking at this point. and,
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
and
Yeah.
this is kind of the
Well,
process of maybe an inspection that's not going super super well. But it certainly wasn't the end of our story. Maybe I'll hand
well,
it off to
yeah.
one of you guys now.
Yeah, like I think it almost like paints a picture that this ends, we're walking out of here, and that shuts things down because you're like thinking, oh my gosh, the roof needs to be replaced, all these things need to be fixed. The
Mm-hmm.
tenants are complaining about the state of disrepair. Seemed like a lot of tenants had there was a lot of changeover between tenants. So sometimes it's like, well, there's high turnover. Are they leaving because of the state of the building, or are they just maybe there's other factors, and maybe that's even actually not bad for us because of the ways we can adjust rents when one tenant leaves or not. But I think before we kind of think about where our heads are at on this property, you did mention having that well, or that really important character throughout this journey that we've been on, right? Through this property, which is the inspector. And I think like we talked about early in the podcast. If you go back to some of the early episodes, we talked about our team. Like who's the right person on your team, and in this property inspector is like, we completely trusted the way he talked to us. He showed us all these different pieces that we need to think about. Like choosing the right property inspector is huge, and I felt that, like, you guys using this property inspector in the past, it felt very comfortable. It felt very like he's got our best interest at heart when pointing some of these things out, and also when the report comes out too, to kind of think about the way representing the state of the building is. So while we've just outlined a ton of negative features about this building, some folks might be like, well, that means
why are we talking about this?
Right,
Yeah.
they're out. But we got to this is also speaking with the inspector of like thinking about how do we spin this, or how do we think about this, and because you might say like, now this is not for us. We're moving on. We want a turnkey property. We're going to move on. But that's not the way we took it. And I think we still haven't made a final decision. This is what this episode kind of is about. But I think when we all walked out, we were kind of thinking, well, okay, let's maybe see where we go now, knowing that we might be sinking $60,000 to $80,000 into the roof, possibly in the next few years, or maybe right away. Do we want to like think about taking on all of these fixes right away? Like, we do have systems in place for our property manager, or maybe a new property manager, to kind of come in and do some of that work. So those are upfront costs that we know that we could absorb, but it's like, hey, where are our heads at? Like, could we build that into the price reduction when reaching back to this group, or to the seller, and go, hey, you know what? We have some concerns over the state of the building. compared to what we offered, and we've now kind of come back with maybe a counter offer. So I don't think we're tossing this out just from the walkthrough,
Right.
even though we saw like some disgusting moments or some, some concerns of ours. But I think we're going to use that to kind of like help this negotiation get a little bit sweeter for us.
Yeah, for sure. And, it's interesting because actually in the beginning of the journey, when Matt and I first partnered, it was sort of like our like sweet spot, like our property was this type of property, right? Like lots of problems,
Yes,
lots
most
of,
definitely.
but the benefit that was taking place back then, that was in 2016 when we began, was the price point was very different as well, right? So we're in a different time. So it's not that the property itself is a concern for us. It's just with everything. So, John, you had mentioned this idea about adjusting the price. For us, we also have to analyze something else, and we have to think about the time and effort that we're going to have to put into just dealing and managing with these challenges, right? So it's like we have to get ourselves to a place where we need to, and we're not going to speak specifically to numbers in terms of what adjustment we're going to make, but we're going to land on a number that makes sense where we go, you know what, it's worth it to put in all that extra time and effort and capital, right? Because there's capital, it's capital intensive to slowly bring this building up to a decent standard. And when you turn over a unit, right, like Matt already mentioned it, most of those units look like they have not been touched significantly, right, or updated in decades, right? Like there is not a whole lot of awesome going on in there, which means if you turn over, a tenant turns over and you go, yay, a tenant's turning over. So now rents, we can raise them. In Ontario here, it's, very restrictive. You can't just, raise rates to whatever rate you want, and you can't ask them to leave. So you basically just have to wait. It's a waiting game. So rents are low. But on the other hand, if you want to pump those rents up, you're going to have to put more capital into updating those units. So, some of that we anticipate when we take over any building, right? In the back of our mind, hey, if there's a couple, and we all usually are like, hey, if we can get a better price, we'll take on that role and we'll deal with them as they come up. But the roof, this sewage issue, which could, spiral into something much bigger, and the electrical piece, as Matt already mentioned, those three things, like we can bury, say, $100K into all three of those things, and we will not see any return from those, so we're not going to see any return. So it's not just if, let's say the number is 100,000, right, which it's likely even more that will have to happen over, the shorter term in the 1 to 3 year time period. That 100K is not going to do anything to our bottom line. We haven't touched, the livability of these units. We've just sort of made sure that the building is now fully functional. So with that said, it's like, what does that cost us? It's like just to put 100,000 in, or say get a rebate of 100,000 on the purchase price, we're taking on all of this additional work and hassle, which we never anticipated having to take on. So you also have to put a price on that as well. And the one benefit, Matt, I've heard you say it a number of times, is that we get to be emotionless about this decision-making process. We don't have to be upset if the seller is not okay with reducing the price. We just say, this is not the property for us. These details, it suggests to us, to be honest, that those details, or many of them, were known to the current owners, and they chose not to, disclose them. So we've negotiated a price based on these things. And, I'm guessing that they know that there's going to be some pushback. And, Matt, you spoke with the selling agent yesterday, and you even said this idea that, like, hey, like, these aren't things that are not going to come up with the eventual buyer, right? So, these buyers are going to come in, they're going to make an agreement, and they're not going to assume the roof is leaking, and they're not going to assume maybe by chance it's unknown, but now it's a material fact that they now know these things are happening. So if we share that report with them and we say, like, you now know this, which means you actually have to, like, state that, or you're supposed to state that legally, that this is,
right.
These are known issues. And to be honest, discussing the price point knowing those things could have been much more productive, because either we don't come to an agreement, we all walk away right from, the get-go, or we then start discussing this property at a more reasonable price point. So for us right now, I've got some numbers in mind, and I want to see, that price point come down pretty significantly to make it worth our time. But I want to flip back to Matt. Like, where's your head at? Like, you're a busy guy. You're running around showing properties, doing all the realtor stuff. Like, I have a funny feeling that, like, doing another flat roof is not exactly the thing you were dreaming about doing in the next 1, 2, 3 years.
I still feel like I need to wash my hair again. You're getting that drip on me. I think, as we discussed it a little bit last night, and I think that's really what the crux of the decision. We have been trying to buy nicer properties, more turnkey properties, so that they can be more expensive. However, we talked about how this is emotionless and almost, John, you haven't been in as many of these multifamily properties as you commented yesterday. The emotional part of residential real estate, people really fall in love with properties. I think yesterday emotion actually had the opposite effect, and you were so grossed out that you're like, "Get me out of here." So I think one important thing to remember when you're
Yeah.
looking at investment properties, you're not going to live there. You're not going to live there, and in fact, you are literally providing a service to people. One of the tenants said to us, "I really hope we don't get kicked out by the new owners because
Right.
I need a place to live."
Mm,
And so
Right.
that's
that's
something
so
going
sad
in.
to hear, right?
I'll have newer to investing clients. They want to go see the places with the granite countertops that are fully renovated top to bottom. And there's a market for that for sure. I've got someone who just bought a premium duplex and is going to get premium rents for it. But our sweet spot has been in buying things that are clean and safe and that are rentable, for a number that works for us and that works for tenants as well. That's kind of been our own sweet spot. So that's something to keep in mind with the emotion. I'm a big believer in never letting a deal die on your end. And so this comes down to relationships with agents. And as a realtor, it's not just about writing up the deal and typing in the boxes and showing the properties. It is really about your relationship with other agents. And so in this case, I've had a great rapport with this agent. We've had ongoing discussions about this property. And, he was open minded when I shared with him our disappointment. I've been able to be pretty candid with him. So we're ultimately going to see. Now, he can't speak for his seller, but it sounds like the seller is reasonable as well. Seller has some other priorities that they're interested in putting their investment dollars into. And investing is a business. Listen, on some properties, especially if you're going to turn them over in a short amount of time, it's not guaranteed you're going to make money. And so bought it in 2001. Here we are a little over 2 years later. Our own personal strategy is to buy and hold for the long
Yeah.
term. We tried, as we've talked about, some flips, some single family, not our game. Some people do terrifically at that. So for this property owner, he might actually have expectations where he would have liked to have made money. Clearly, the price point at which he started would have made him a handsome return. But once we present to him the sort of facts and the logic here of the challenges, and I talked to the other realtor about how we might present this with a summary with some estimated costs, very logic based, no emotion whatsoever, and the price reduced, we'll then see what he says. And so that relationship will allow us to have the conversation. But I would say that not walking away is probably where I'm leaning, so far as we get this property for a renegotiated price, because it comes back to the fundamentals.
Yeah.
8 units at a great price per door in a terrifically walkable location with separate meters. The exterior was in decent shape.
Yep.
And we have a conversion opportunity. So the crux of our conversation last night was, if we fast forwarded 25 years into the future, would we be happy to have this building and deal with the current headaches now?
Yeah. That's I love that framework that you just said about 25 years. Often Kyle and I talk about the 10-10-10 rule, which is if I make a decision, that's not necessarily an investment kind of decision, but it works for you here. It's like if I make a decision, how am I going to feel about it 10 minutes right after I feel about, after I made it? How am I going to feel about it 10 months after I made the decision, and then how am I going to feel about it 10 years after? And I feel like where our heads are at, if we're 10 minutes, we're probably still like, oh, we got some work to do here. And in 10 months might be like, not that such a big deal. We already did the work. It's not that, big of deal of work. We're going to be doing a little bit of managing. Maybe we haven't sunk any extra money into it yet. And then 10 years we'll probably be laughing to say, hey, we already did all this stuff and we still have this great, like you said, Matt, there are a lot of great upsides to this property that you've articulated. We haven't even really talked about that conversion idea right now, because if we can, this is where my head's at, guys, is that if we can manipulate this price point down enough so that we're somewhat close to being cash flow positive now, think about how great it's going to be in the 10-year or even the 10-month option on the 10-10-10 rule if we do sink a little bit more money, which will provide extra revenue to us by converting, say, that giant restaurant or that giant commercial property or commercial unit in the bottom into 2, maybe 3 residential units, and then think about that in the 10-year or even the 10-month option. Like I think we'll be laughing at that point by going like, hey, we just added all of this to this when we got it for almost kind of cash flow positive now. Like we're not, even if we, I think, get it for where our heads are leaning towards to adjust for the roof and adjust for some of these other fixes we're going to have, we're probably still not at a cash flow positive yet. But lots of potential upside coming our way, I think, if we can just bring that down just a little bit.
Yeah, I love it. That's a great way to sort of frame things. And, sounds like you've got a good sort of big takeaway. And, I think that's exactly where my head lands, is that, I certainly don't want to walk into more work for not a whole lot of benefit, even if it is in that first 10, like the 10 minutes or even 10 months. I do want to make it worth it. But when we think about, that longer range thinking, just like Matt had said, a lot of times things that seem like a big deal at the time, go 5 years down the road, 10 years down the road, they're non-issues so it's a non-issue at all. So for me, I think the big takeaway from this conversation is this deal is definitely not a dead deal. And I love, Matt, you saying, and I've heard you say it before, is like, we're not going to let this die on our end. We're going to come back and we're going to share more specifically like what we're hoping to achieve and why, because again, it's got to be win-win on both sides. And if it isn't a win for the seller, hey, who knows? Matt, you always say like, hey, they can play the lottery numbers and maybe there's somebody out there who's got lots of cash sitting around and is looking for a building exactly like this. So cash flow is going to be a different situation for them. Maybe they're not leveraging as much as we're intending to leverage on that building. But ultimately, at the end of the day, without that roof, without the sewer issue, without the electrical, we were fine. Essentially, with everything else, we could have taken it at that price and went, you know what? Yeah, so the units aren't in the best of shape, but we've been there before. It's all fine. So for us, I definitely think that this deal is still alive and well. We just need to kind of come to a conclusion with these sellers that, hey, do you really want to sell this property right now to friends like us, or maybe they're just not ready for that to take place yet, and they're willing to let it sit a little bit longer. It seems like they've been letting it sit since they purchased it just 2 short years ago.
Every property is going to have its opportunities and its challenges, and the art of the deal comes in finding a solution that works for both sides. This isn't about stealing anything. This isn't about ripping somebody off. This is really about finding a property where the opportunities outweigh the challenges, or the opportunities make the challenges palatable because you see those opportunities as being bigger. And this property may be very well that. I think by the time this episode airs, we will have made our decision, and it'll be fun to update the audience on what we've done, and then maybe dive into some of the more details about where and numbers and get into that. But this has been a lot of fun just having this live conversation about analyzing this property.
I agree. And maybe we should do this more often. Maybe we should just hit record and start just talking about different things that are in our heads. But yeah, stick around, folks. In a few episodes, you'll be hearing the outcome of this property in our decision and the reasons that led to that decision. Like Matt said, we'll share the numbers as well. to kind of see where we landed and what lender we went with and why we went with that lender and what other team members we may have brought in along the way. So we'll keep this as an ongoing update. But hey, if you are listening right now, then you should pat yourself on the back, and we would love for you to give us or rate us on your favorite podcast platform, the one you're listening to right now. Just hit that rating and review. Leave us an honest rating and review. It helps. Every rating helps another listener start to change the trajectory of their wealth. So please do that, and we'll see you on the next episode.
All links, resources, and transcripts from this episode can be found over on the website. That's investedteacher.com/episode 32. Again, that is investedteacher.com/episode 32.
And if you're watching over on YouTube, you'll see, you'll meet, is it Murray or?
Yeah, that's Murray. That's Murray.
Murray the cat. John's cat is
oh my gosh,
practically standing on his head. But for those who are not interested about Murray, you can head on over to investedteacher.com/books, and you can check out our book list, all kinds of awesome reads over there. And if you actually click the button, you can grab a printable PDF, and hey, there's a couple additional titles on that particular PDF that you can print and take along with you.
And if you are thinking about getting into real estate investing and were kind of like me, and you weren't ready to kind of bite the bullet or take that first step on your own, then we encourage you to consider reaching out to us. We partner with people just like you a lot of times when we enter into our deals as joint venture partners, so that we can help you, teach you along the way on what to expect and how to get comfortable making these kinds of decisions like we're talking about here. So reach out to us at investedteacher.com/JV. It's investedteacher.com/JV.
All right, students, class dismissed.
Just a reminder to our invested students that this content is for informational purposes only. You should not construe any such information or other material as legal, tax, investment, financial, or cat taking care of advice.